All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Snowflake for Growth for Financial Services and FinTech. Looking at the attendees out there, we're already up to about 50 folks who have joined, so thank you for coming. I'm looking through some of the companies here. I'm seeing Bank of America, Prudential, Sydney Federal, American Express, Fidelity, Constellation. This is an excellent audience we have out there, and again, I'd like to thank you all for coming. We'll be walking through how leading financial services and fintech firms are leveraging Snowflake for growth to expand relationship banking, expand their share of balance sheet, and drive cross-product adoption, all while increasing client satisfaction. So we're really excited for this presentation today. I'm Anthony Rodio. I'm the Chief Customer Officer here at Flywheel. I'll be guiding this conversation and moderating with our two special guests who we have joining today. I have the pleasure of working with some national banks, some regional banks, as well as some fintech partners leading our customer organization, and I'm excited to share some of the use cases and value. But let me go ahead and turn it over to the folks who will be guiding us today across most of the conversation. One is Luke Ambrosetti, and Luke is a friend. He's also a fellow New Jerseyan. He's representing the Snowflake team today. Luke, why don't you go ahead and say a few words and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Hi, I'm Luke. I work for Snowflake as a partner solutions engineer for the Powered by Snowflake program, of which Flywheel is a part of. I come from a MarTech background. I spent the last 4.5 years working with customers on cloud data platforms, and doing own media marketing campaigns using those cloud platforms. So excited to talk to everyone, to you guys here today.
Awesome, thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Luke. And of course, we have David Joosten with us as well, our co-founder and co-CEO at Flywheel. So go ahead, David.
Hey, everyone. David Joosten, one of the co-founders. My background actually was in combining marketing for technology companies originally, and then marrying that with actually distributed data systems from the computer science side. And what's really exciting is the technology foundations that are available today have enabled things from a capability perspective that, essentially was only accessible to companies that were willing to build everything internally 5 to 10 years ago. So it's been really exciting to just be a part of that journey as the entire industry and the technology is matured.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right in, David. I know we have a lot of folks who have joined. We're about 7 minutes after the hour here, and let's go through the key points.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we wanted to start with the outcome in mind and kind of work backwards from there. So, what are those key use cases that we've seen, our customers across national and regional banks, as well as fintech companies, strive to provide and to achieve? Then we'll dive into some of the challenges that have made that difficult, particularly for this space, and then explore essentially a new model that allows for driving that relationship banking at scale, sort of making it feel one-to-one the way that a local banker would, but to be able to use other channels like marketing, like some of the CRMs and the customer channels that are available to actually really drive that personalization forward.
Excellent. So I think the first thing we want to do here, David, is really talk through some of the use cases and the why, right? So for the folks who have attended, let's walk through some of the use cases and some of the outcomes that we can help drive.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, in some of the conversations I have, particularly with the Snowflake Data Cloud, folks, look at it as, well, it stores my customer data. What does that do for me on the acquisition side? And actually, there's a variety of use cases there as well. So we found use cases with one of our fintech clients to do KYC nurturing. So as folks are being onboarded, there's usually a multi-step process in fintech and financial services. So there's a lot of opportunities for folks to drop off, and how do you kind of re-engage them in ways that make the most sense and are most effective? And then things like referrals and lookalike targeting. So finding other folks that represent your best customers and using that as seed audiences across some of the paid media channels. Luke, do you want to cover some of the cross-sell examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, in cross-sell, one of the great examples, is pushing a customer or having a customer look at opening a savings account, right? If you can tell that a certain customer is saving, more than they're spending in their checking account at a great rate each month, it goes, oh, maybe we should push them to open a savings account. Or what happened for me last year is, you have a savings account that had maybe so much money, and that customer is not a homeowner. Hey, maybe you want to look at a mortgage with us, right? So there are lots of opportunities there for cross-selling as well.
Yeah, I think one of the key points you just mentioned there, Luke, is in financial services, it ties so closely to the life cycle of the person and the household to understand, like, are you present at those critical moments in time? When someone's looking for their first home, when someone is looking to start a business and wants a line of credit, or someone's looking to expand their investments in some way. Like, all of those decision points are really important for those folks in that moment of their life. And are you top of mind is certainly an important factor of success.
Yeah, I think that's right. And when we talk about top of mind, really what that comes down to is kind of share, right? And whether it's share a wallet, share a balance sheet, like getting from that, being there and being present as a financial partner to the household, to the commercial entity, and really driving upsell and retention. And there's a few ways that we've seen folks be able to do that, whether it's credit card, share a wallet, expanding AUMs and investable funds, getting those PLOC folks to depositors over time, right? So there really are a lot of opportunities out there if you're just willing to engage with folks across the right platforms, the right channels, cross-channel, and measure your impact that you're having with some of those means KPIs before seeing those results over time in terms of share. Finally, I mean, if you think about churn, if we think about churn in terms of folks who used to hold mortgages with us, thinking about the industry and the macroeconomic situation that we're going into now, we know at some point in the future, there will probably be an opportunity for refis, right? And being able to drive those folks who are looking for refis back into your firm is a real opportunity, and something that when you have the first party data on Snowflake with a system like Flywheel for activation and measurement, you can automate a lot of this kind of audience capture and segmentation to be able to identify those folks and intercept them at the right time when they might be ready to make a move. So we think that one is a big opportunity, especially in the midterm here. David, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to add, like, at least from my experience working with several financial services firms, churn's a really difficult problem because it's usually not obvious. So, if you're signed up for Netflix or something, it's very obvious when you turn that subscription off. And financial services, things happen in sort of a spectrum. So a client that was previously making all of their W-2 direct deposits into that checking account suddenly moves that to a different account. They're still active. They still have an account. And yet, like, as a share of their total financial picture, that's changed dramatically for you as the bank and financial institution serving them. And the same thing holds true for credit card utilization and other things like it, where there's a lot of really rich data signals that can actually help you get ahead of and be proactive about client engagement instead of reactive after someone closes a line of credit or closes a checking account.
Yeah, I think that's right. And as both you, David, and Luke obviously know, I have the pleasure of managing a team of not only solutions architects that are in the trenches with the customers on the day-to-day meetings, but also data engineers and data scientists. And typically one of the first things we'll do is leverage the first-party data on Snowflake with our team to go in and set definitions for things like churn, right? And how does your organization actually look at churn? And you might be a large national bank that has a clear definition of churn across different product areas, but you might not. And if you need help setting up those ways of kind of looking at your customer base, that's something that we can help with as well. And once the data is on Snowflake, it becomes straightforward to be able to set up those criteria, those rules, and kind of write those like propensity to churn, whether you have a model that's predicting that or whether you just have an algorithm that's kind of scoring that. You can write it right back to Snowflake and then use it for segmentation and activation over time.
So one of the things we wanted to talk through here was this is really all part of a growth cycle for the firms that just sustainably grow in a rate that's above their peers. Like, we tried to distill that down to figure out, like, what were they doing that was somewhat different and differentiated. And essentially they have a very tight growth cycle that we're kind of displaying here. So they're designing things with instant feedback for the folks like the marketing team to be able to understand, well, is it worth running a campaign for this target audience across these channels? Is it sizable enough? Do I think that the overall return will be worth it before they sort of invest media and creative development and all those things? Is it very easy for them to self-serve in that capacity as well as launch so that it's available across every channel? whether it's a paid media channel, their email platform, mobile channels. And frankly, within financial services, there are so many other channels, from the actual in-branch to teller to like a variety of other means that you can use to engage customers. And then finally, the differentiation around being able to repeatedly measure in a standardized way means that you can look at some of these campaigns and efforts and initiatives on an apples to apples basis, and establish a really great framework that the entire team can use to determine where success can be found and how you can scale that success. And obviously the key piece being that feeds back into design. So you're actually leveraging those learnings as you go and building sort of evergreen ways of reaching and engaging folks that to be effective.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one of the things that, the first time folks see this will sometimes think, yes, this looks like a very nice ideal, but how far am I actually from it today? So I'm excited as we kind of go through a few of the specifics and the tactics along the way for folks to hopefully grasp in the audience that they're a lot closer than they think they are, and they can be the hero to take the organization there, the firm there, coming out of this session today.
So what kind of industry challenges do people face? I think it'd be great, Luke, for you to talk to a few of them, and I'll talk to a few of them.
Yeah, in my experience here, financial services and FinTech, have complex data needs, and they have really complex data models, right? And many relationships alongside that. Customers have multiple accounts, right? Or can have multiple accounts, and an account can have multiple customers on that account. So, as that complexity increases, so does the logic for those audiences to market to those customers. Of course, data needs to be secure, right? You need good governance controls on that data internally as well, for your different teams, right? And then, of course, data sources are coming from both online and offline sources. So you're really trying to again have that single view of a customer and what they're doing and how they're interacting with you, in your organization. And then, David, I'll pass it back to you. Kind of talk us through the regulation, and especially about GDPR, CCPA, how that ties in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so these are just like a collection of some of the things that we've heard from some of our customers in the space. But obviously, regulatory scrutiny is huge. Everything from just the way that you execute, from like a PMO or project management organization perspective, to how do you manage GDPR and CCPA and other privacy regulations, and making sure that's really incorporated across the entire stack of the way that discovery and design happens, all the way through execution through those marketing channels. Like I mentioned before, a lot of financial service specific channels and data sets to work with, and you really need to own your data, in the sense that the models and the assumptions you make have huge consequences for the kind of engagements you end up with. And then frankly, relationship banking has now essentially become table stakes across the industry. And the question is, from a competitive point of view, how do you just establish the technology foundations that it just facilitate the people and processes internally to drive some of the sort of one-to-one and very personalized engagement, but at scale, in a way that it doesn't just happen at the individual banker level. It can happen organizationally, and by default. And I think a lot of that stemmed from this need to actually have a technology solution that's purpose-built for financial services and FinTech. And we see people try to repurpose tools that have been actually built for retail or built for a lot of other use cases. And it's hard to adapt those kinds of tool sets and platforms in the financial services context. Either they don't meet security requirements, or in some cases, they just make assumptions that the core goal is just revenue. And as obviously we know, the kind of KPIs that the customers that we talk to on a regular basis share are much more nuanced than that, as we kind of shared in the use cases up front. So with that, I think we wanted to talk through kind of some of the current approaches that we've seen some folks try to use. Go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, and so it's part of my job at Snowflake, or a lot of it really, is working with these marketing technology partners, like Flywheel and like some of these others that we see here even, right? So we have both kind of a customer data platform, a CDP, and a marketing cloud, and those are fine solutions. It's not that those solutions can't work for a financial services customer, right? But there are trade-offs, right? Whenever you use these different types of platforms, right? I'm talking to more and more customers about this too, especially so with the marketing cloud, you really have to ship them all of your data, right? So kind of data security and governance goes out the window with that. And again, there are ways that some of those platforms can make it better, but it's, again, your data is leaving your source of truth, right? Which is Snowflake, typically for many of our customers, right? And so it's very similar with the CDP as well. A CDP, especially one that doesn't work, very closely with Snowflake and data sharing, which we'll get to. It's challenging because, again, it's another data silo. Effectively, it's another source of truth for your customers. Like you were saying, a lot of them were built specifically for retail or for other use cases, and not those many relationships that we were talking about earlier that you might see in banking. So yeah, I'll say it, of course, it's always going to depend, right? But some of these solutions can present a challenge for financial services and fintech customers.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they were built usually 5, 10, 15 years ago, before really like the maturity of the cloud and the data cloud specifically. So
Yep.
They had to solve sort of all in one, try to be a database of sorts, also do sort of some data capture for you as well as sync. And, all in ones can be hard to execute well. And with the rise of the data cloud on the next visual, I think there's essentially this new way that can leverage some of the Snowflake capabilities and strengths. And Luke, I'd love for you to kind of touch upon some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is what's Snowflake's all about, right? It's a single data platform, right? For your business and for all the different lines of business, right? Your teams, your different teams across your business are not having to fight over compute resources, right? Snowflake scales almost infinitely, right? Everyone is also at the same time working from the same copy of data, right? So Snowflake is extremely unique offering in data collaboration, so that not only can you share data easily internally without having to copy or FTP data everywhere, right? But you can also get data from our growing marketplace, right? As you see here, over 1,100 data sets. So that, again, when you're trying to enrich your data, right, with maybe some data from TransUnion, for example, who is a provider, right, on the marketplace, you can bring that in extremely easily without having to copy data, without having to FTP data out. And again, have it with all those kind of security and governance aspects that Snowflake's offer as well, right? Role-based access control. We're not going to get too technical there, but Snowflake can do it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like, again, and I'll just touch on the idea of even a data clean room as well, which is becoming massively popular. And Snowflake, has the tech to easily do that as well, to be able to share data between two different parties, without either party having to see that data or have access to that data. And again, we're seeing a lot of growth there, a lot of growth in apps like Flywheel, who are building on top of Snowflake, who are coming to the Snowflake Data Cloud and saying, look, I'll use Snowflake as the back end because that's the solution that makes the most sense for my customers.
Yeah, and I was just going to touch upon like a couple things that I've seen just in terms of some of the customer examples for some of the data access. You mentioned TransUnion. There's obviously the Fair Credit Reporting Act that has pretty stringent requirements on when do you create a credit report that must be shared. And by actually being able to do it at a group level and share audiences that just fit within certain windows and things, we've actually worked with partners that allow us to bring that to life for folks that are trying to do usually obviously credit related marketing and sales activity. And from a security and governance standpoint, I've seen this live at certain banks where, before Flywheel, like CSVs are sort of the way that people share things that are lists with contact information that will be used in marketing campaigns. And when you do that, you lose an audit trail. So you don't know who's had access to it and what they've used that PII for. Obviously, from like a security perspective, email is not a secure means of communication unless you use secure email, which many people often will not do with that PII. And so part of this too is like just the risk mitigation of how do you actually build an encrypted path for all of this very sensitive data that has regulatory risk. And Snowflake provides a great platform to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the things at the low level, even that we've seen in terms of the like fine-grained access with masking and masking tied to roles, right?
Yeah.
In terms of not only PII visibility internally, but then leveraging the masking metadata to do things like automated governance and control for CCPA, GDPR requests that are coming in for delete my data, serve me my data that you have about me. So
yeah,
I
really.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh yeah, so it really, it's what I love about it, right? Especially that the masking. It's like it allows you to give that data to your marketing teams or whatever teams need to use it without having to give them the full visibility of it, right? Again, and it makes it so easy to do that within the Snowflake data cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very powerful feature.
And so what's been made possible essentially is the ability to actually build the software and application layer without needing to bring your data to it like you traditionally would have to do with a CDP or a marketing cloud model that has its own back end to store your data. What you're able to do today is actually just connect to that table and view or series of tables and views within your Snowflake and actually just drive the capability of how do I make it accessible to the marketing and business users that don't know SQL. There's no need for that to be able to still provide a lot of the business value. So I don't know if you wanted to mention some of those few bullets, Luke, here, and I'd love to talk through some of the key functions and capabilities that come out.
Yeah, but like you're saying, we're seeing more and more partners, do this. And just to be clear with everyone, right? Flywheel is not storing any of this data, right? Flywheel is connecting to your Snowflake account to create, these audiences and to create these user segments to be activated upon. So again, we're seeing more and more apps do this, right? Say, hey, look, I don't want to copy the data. It doesn't make any sense for me to copy that data out, right? Like we mentioned for all those reasons, security, just data latency, right? It's a lot more apps are coming, to the data now instead of having to ship the data to the apps, like kind of in the previous model, like as we mentioned.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention, literally going through an RFP with a leading national bank. When it got to their information security and architecture review stage, the CDP was actually essentially thrown out at that stage because the nature of it would require them to ship sensitive depositor data to a third-party platform and then therefore lose sort of the governance and control of the distribution of that and access to that data. And so for a firm like them, it was critical, literally it was a non-starter if you had a system that required them to send all of their data out in order to use it. And really what happens is, yes, some personalization fields need to go out, but any of the data that's used for targeting specifically can stay within your Snowflake. So all of those fields don't need to be shared widely. And what that means is that the data volume is much more scalable, but it's really just the audience memberships that go out. Just say this is a part of a group. And that's a much more sort of security conscious way to sort of apply that really need to know philosophy to the entire growth stack.
Yeah, I think that last piece is super important on the need to know piece, right? Because it is definitely much more secure to just send the targeting lists and the only as needed personalization data. But that shouldn't sound limiting. That gives your marketers everything that they need and your customer support teams everything that they need and your branches everything that they need to continue and maintain this personal relationship with your clients. So it's been a really powerful kind of start from first principles. What do those relationships need, and how can we get it there in a secure way? And the answer was come to Snowflake and be right on top of the data in Snowflake and only share out what's needed.
Yeah, and so essentially audience sizing and discovery and design, being able to actually activate them across all your channels, and then also just to institute automated experimentation and measurement to see what works is now possible with all of the data sets here on the left-hand side that are found within your Snowflake, or essentially we can partner with you to bring it there so that you can use anything to target, personalize, and measure your marketing initiatives. And that's what's key, is it's the most scalable way we've seen folks be able to leverage and not be limited by data sets that are only available in a marketing cloud or elsewhere. And so it allows you to have much faster time to value for a lot of folks that have invested in the data cloud. Everyone's working off of one source of truth, whether it's the marketing team, the reporting and analytics teams, or other folks at the firm. And that makes sure you can consistently enforce the right targeting to the right folks, and you're not sort of coming off from two different channels or two different teams saying different things. And then finally, it just scales, right? As Luke mentioned, there's no sort of copying of this data. It's really sitting in place and just being directed by the application layer. So we're going to go through some examples here.
Last thing there on the scaling with Snowflake is it's not only in terms of breadth, but in terms of latency for any batch updates, for any folks who are interested in the low-level details on the call. Snowflake's really nice because you can actually set the size of the warehouse, and you can increase speeds for the query computation time based on that warehouse size. So truly, if you have needs for lower latency use cases, you have a dial to turn with Snowflake. And because Flywheel sits right on top of it, we can run as fast as Snowflake can, which I think is a really nice combination when it comes to the specific use cases for your firm.
And so, essentially, I just wanted to talk this very briefly, but those that, virtuous growth cycle we talked about with design and launch and measure can be reinstantiated here by having, a specialized layer that activates the data that sits in Snowflake. So we'll walk through that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, so let's talk about, kind of the before and after here. With, again, a lot of what I've seen, before customers use a tool like Flywheel is that they're really just, using, just raw SQL, right? And they might have like an Airflow or something set up to batch a file, via FTP daily, right? To, a downstream, marketing cloud or even a CDP, even to where the marketers can go through and do more in that tool. But yeah, it's the hard part about that, though. Even let's forget the data latency. Let's forget the security. You have to. Typically, the marketing team is, having to request this from the data team, right? And it's a 2, 4, 6 weeks. It's a long process to do that, or it can be. But even if you have, some more technical marketers who can write SQL, it's still, it can be a pretty brittle process. Right. And so I'll let David here talk about the after, but using a tool, right, to help with that makes it a lot easier and increases your time overall spent creating these audiences and campaigns.
Yeah, the big thing is just for the first time allowing the marketing and business teams to see their customer data and the client data. For too long, they just don't have instant feedback. So really where you get loss is in the iterative cycle between and thinking this, what does it translate to in terms of the actual sizing, but also all the features, like what kind of other accounts do these folks use, or what other attributes, geographically or demographically or even just behaviorally do they have? And that's what allows to actually the innovation around marketing to happen much more quickly. And so on the next visual here, just wanted to spend kind of 15 seconds looking at, what this looks like in practice for folks that are trying to do this for, let's say, a cross-sell campaign with savings accounts. So you can see here, someone just, can look through transactional data that's been linked, any number of data sets. They can choose things like, do they have a checking account today? And that on the right-hand side is updating exactly what their, overall target is looking like. So what assets does this correspond to across that client base, that subsegment of the client base? And they can add other breakdowns and things. But that's sort of the discoverability that we're talking about when we're talking about that stage and that step.
Yeah, it really is magic when you get some of the folks on the business and outreach side, the marketing side, the sales side, the customer experience side in here for the first time. I heard one partner call it the Audience Explorer the other day, and they were sizing an audience. They were looking at it was a regional bank looking at clients that they knew were not homeowners, and they started with the assumption that I can just filter down to my renters. And they filtered down to renters, and it was only a few thousand customers, which was smaller than they hoped the audience size would be. But then when they realized, oh, maybe we don't have validation on the form capture upstream when we take that data in, let's expand that to renters and folks that we don't have an answer to this question for. So we included nulls. They included nulls, and all of a sudden the audience was an order of magnitude larger. And then it's just a messaging tweak to say, okay, we might not know that you don't own, but we know we can target you for a mortgage product, right? That was pretty powerful to see in real time. And this is the way that you kind of get these unlocks with the marketing teams, where you're not wasting a ton of effort on an audience that might be too small to even prove ROI for the firm to begin with.
Yeah, I think you you nailed it with that, right? And again, it's that audience sizing is such a critical component, right? Because if you're having to delay that back and forth, then it's that campaign. It might. I've even seen it to where we actually even didn't even do the campaign because there was just too much back and forth between the marketing team and the data team that it just didn't make sense to launch the campaign because either the offer expired or the season the campaign was just over. So the financial landscape changed, right, or the market changes, didn't make sense to do that anymore. So sometimes just a lot of wasted effort at that point.
And I was just going to mention, like, part of what comes up is what else is running. There's a governance aspect. Once you actually unlock this for marketers and for other business teams and sales teams, all of a sudden you have proliferation, which is great because it's the beginning of innovation. But that means that you have to have a really great controls in place to allow folks to understand where there's overlap with other initiatives that are happening, and having a single view of all of the audiences that are going cross-channel to reach folks. And I think that's where, it's really helpful to have this layer to facilitate both the velocity of origination, but also the governance on the other side.
Yeah, I think that's right, David. How about in terms of overall timing?
Yeah, basically, like, one of the things that we see is a lot of the firms that we work with before actually launch usually something like anywhere from 1 to 3 sort of like audience-based initiatives per quarter. And it usually is centered around the fact that there are all of these sort of barriers and friction points. And even just the logistics of once you decide on the audience sizing, like delivering it to the channel and getting all the partners aligned, doing the validation and standard suppressions and everything, and making sure that the list is appropriately formed. All of those things just mean that velocity on sort of that growth cycle is down by a factor of 10 or 20x. And so really, like, the cost sometimes is, does the campaign run or not? But a lot of it also is, essentially that means that those other 10, 20, 30 experiments and audiences that could become the next set of very effective engagement-based audiences are never run because you just never get to them as a team. But the goal here is that, you're able to sync all of those to all these destinations seamlessly, so that from a single point of truth, you actually reach everywhere. And that allows you to actually go through a very consolidated and unified experience for the client, where they feel like, wow, the bank gets it. Like, everything that I see from the bank is a consistent message. And so that's the most kind of effective marketing, is really reaching that activation point where I've seen something 3 times. This is the time I may actually use it to call someone and arrange an appointment to ask about it. And then here we're just showing quickly, like, what does it look like in practice? Like, the audience shows up in Facebook's advertising platform. So you can see, like, literally here's the same title. I can now attach media and creative to it. All right, let's talk experimentation. Not everyone does experimentation. I'll start there. But folks do this. A lot of folks do this manually today. They have data science and stats folks that work on the team to try and drive it. Still possible. Yeah. SQL. Go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, it is. And, I'd say that there can, whether you want to do it or not, right? And, in-house internally, there definitely is value there, right? If you want to do it internally, it's again, the biggest thing is being able to do, I think for me here, at least, the biggest value here is, again, doing it on the data as the data should be, right? Not, a copy of the data 1, 2, 3 a week stale, right? So effectively being able to experiment, within your source of truth, I think is the most powerful thing here. And sure, whether you have the resources to do the experimentation internally, great. This can still be a great solution. If you don't, this can help a ton, for experimentation that, the holdout groups that you want to be doing and the testing that you want to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think partly, if you can standardize it, you now have much more comparable results. And I think that's really applying the scientific method and making it accessible to everyone. So that's a great example. And then, what does it mean at the end result? So folks that have applied a segmentation model, they said, hey, we're going to look at the entirety of our client base and figure out what are the key dimensions that I need to understand these customers, the most salient features, so to speak, and then apply, specific audiences to the different cells or different subsegments that are generated by that. Like, one of the, things that is most impactful is this sort of chart on the right-hand side that shows, well, here's the statistical uplift for each of those audiences. Each is a color represented here in the band. And what's the sum total impact of running this as a series of programs with this, like, central point of view? It's audience centric, not channel centric. And that means that, like, you're truly doing the relationship banking that you set out to do, which allows you to look at longitudinal characteristics, like, not just did they sort of engage with the channel, but did this actually change their overall assets under management, or did it change the total loan origination value in the example we've shown here?
Yeah, I think one other piece about that longitudinal data that's coming in is that it's coming in as the campaign is running too, right? It's not like Luke was saying, where someone might be doing an analysis in SQL post facto, but you can have an evergreen campaign that might get stale at some point, and this will help you catch that, which is really helpful in terms of optimizing the efficiency of your spend across paid media channels, or just wear out with your clients in terms of inundating them with emails and messages across other channels as well.
The real-time feedback from marketers is definitely key. And so just revisiting the why we're here, kind of looking across a lot of these are just pulled from, the customers that we work with today. You can really target the entirety of even pre and then post, acquisition to the entire customer lifecycle and drive some really incredible results and customer experiences. And from the customer's point of view, essentially, it feels like, even through scaled channels, that, their banking partner, their fintech partner knows them, that they actually are looking ahead for what's next for them in a very helpful way, as opposed to just sending out, like, the, credit offer every, X weeks, as often is the case in some folks' spaces. So I think it's a good reminder of, like, the capability set and what it's actually for at the end of the day. Oh yeah, just a few things that we've heard. Go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about this, or already, but it is getting your data, being able to use that single source of truth, moving as fast as the customer can, right? I mean, so that was one of my favorite things, working in an environment like this is the technology wasn't a barrier, right, to moving fast and getting things done. It just kind of you kind of forgot about it, got out of the way, and allowed you kind of to dream and do as you wanted to. And sorry to interrupt, David.
No, that's a great point. Actually, we see an S curve for most clients where they go from having a couple audiences per quarter to in some cases 30 or 50 across all these channels, and then it actually ends up plateauing again, and they're testing them against each other. And what's naturally happening is they're reaching the maturity level where the data and the technology is no longer the bottleneck. At this point, it's really about the overall capacity for the engagement channels and marketing's creativity. And that's really what it's about, is getting technology out of the way to allow the business teams to do what they want to do.
Yeah, I heard
so
one.
Go ahead, Anthony.
I heard one analytics leader refer to that as moving the flashlight on somewhere else, right? Like the flashlight is on us for a while, and then we get things going, and then it's in terms of the quality of the content, the strategy around cross-channel and omni-channel, and then measuring the right results and getting that all live.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it really comes down to, how do you just unlock what the business teams do best? How do you do it faster? And how do you make sure that each shot on goal that you take, you understand what works so you can scale success? And then the guardrails around it, around security. All right, we're against CSV sharing. We want folks that we want accountability and tracing, and we want the even on the audience's side, for there to be sort of governance and controls in place so that multiple stakeholders can actually review things before they go out live. And that really reduces the financial services firm or the fintech firm's risk with some of those as they strive for growth. So in terms of like the next steps here, right? Like I know sometimes folks say, hey, like honestly, that sounds great, but here's where I am today. And it's actually pretty straightforward. So on the one side, we're going to break it down. If you have customer data in Snowflake or client data in Snowflake, what does it actually take? So, essentially you can actually connect with us for a demo that matches your use cases, so that we can actually go through and test your assumptions around what are the things you need to solve for. Second, we actually can link to your Snowflake tables, and then you're actually exploring your own data with the Flywheel interface. And for most financial services and fintech firms that have their customer data in Snowflake, it can be as little as 3 weeks from signing up. And their first audience, we usually target cross-sell type audiences, which I've listed on the right-hand side. They're some of the most effective audiences in financial services and fintech, particularly when you have obviously multiple product offerings or product lines. And if you're just getting started with Snowflake, connect with us for a data strategy session at no cost. So, it's worth an hour to figure out essentially, where you are today and how, you have sort of a path to this vision that we're sharing here. And we actually offer quick start packages that get folks up and running within 4 to 8 weeks, depending on like the scope and complexity that you want to tackle. And so that allows you to really launch that first Flywheel audience, immediately thereafter within a week. And oftentimes we'll see folks on that path actually choose like an acquisition audience, one of the ones I've listed here on the right-hand side. So, ultimately, it's really an accessible path. And the reason for it is Snowflake is a fantastic platform for onboarding and bringing and landing data sets, serving as really like the data exchange for the firm. And then Flywheel can link natively to it. And so there is, really no faster path, especially when you compare it to the adoption of a CDP or a customer data platform or a marketing cloud, where you have to recreate whatever data models you have internally through a third party's assumptions that say it has to be this shape and form so that you can use it within my backend and my systems. this really leverages what your team would want to use anyways for analytics purposes. So there's a lot of really nice side effects for choosing this path.
Great. Thanks, David. I think with that, we do want to first off open it up for Q&A. So if you have a question, please drop one in the chat. And thank you for spending this time with us today in advance. You can sign up at snowflakeforgrowth.com for those sessions that David had mentioned. And I do want to thank Luke and David as well. And as the first questions are flowing in here, and let me see what we have coming in. So we had a few send some to me during the session. So the first one I have here is, as you make this capability more accessible, do you have control or governance issues? This is probably one that could be addressable. We addressed it a little bit on the Snowflake side. I think we addressed it a little bit less within the Flywheel platform, David.
Yeah, absolutely. On the Snowflake side, obviously the IAM kind of roles and things. On the Flywheel side, essentially you can have even data set groups that allow folks to maybe are relevant for a specific line of business. We will often see within private wealth management treated very differently, obviously, from some of the rest of the depositor groups, because there's a sort of a higher touch and client engagement model there. So each sort of those teams can have their own views that are enabled with certain data sets plugged into the Flywheel platform that allows them to actually have right access. And then on the other side, once they've actually created audiences, I mentioned this briefly before, but there's actually the ability to have governance controls where there's an approval process that other folks who have administrative rights and things can actually look at, so that you guarantee that you have a really great, enforcement function for things that go live in market.
Yeah, that's great, David.
Great question, actually, Anthony. I was just going to mention quickly, because most people actually don't foresee that to be the core issue when they start, because they're talking about 2 or 3 audiences a quarter. It's like the kind of question you will have downstream once you scale.
And I think one of the things too there that's nice that we haven't mentioned is that all of the audience membership and those treatment control assignments, the snapshotting, whether you have your audiences routing hourly or daily, all of that rates back to Snowflake too. So there is kind of full audit trail that's not in a black box somewhere for anyone to go ahead and look at. Okay, what did happen? When was this audience exported for the first time? Who was a member on this given day? That's pretty powerful for folks in the financial industry as well. Okay, we have another one for how do analytics users use Flywheel?
Yeah, certainly. So, essentially, this is the bridge between the analytics function and the sort of business teams. And so, we've seen everything. I'm trying to think of some of the FinTech examples. One of our clients is in FinTech. The analytics team actually uses it to generate some of the cohorting analysis and some of the, because you're creating all these snapshots as you're defining these dynamic audiences. And also, frankly, just to get the standard suppressions and the standard queries to get them started for their own analysis. Instead of sort of sharing, queries back and forth across the team, it's a really great way for them to do that. But ultimately, they're now actually being able to serve all of those use cases for the marketing team by only having to do things once. So they set up the view that's going to be plugged into Flywheel. They can obviously generate their own audiences. But now, essentially it's only for incremental fields or views or things like that they get involved, because now you've made the marketer autonomous. And that's a fantastic place to be, so that those analytics and data science folks can actually focus on building predictive models, getting customer and client insights, building out some of the reporting that the executive leadership team needs and relies upon. All of those things actually get unlocked because you've taken this and made it self-serve.
Yeah, especially once some of the partners we've been with for multiple years, what you see is the requests from marketing and sales to the analytics and data teams become much more focused and much higher leverage, because we need to add a certain field or a certain table or type of data that's going to unlock these 3 high value use cases, right? So a nice feedback loop for the data gravity within Snowflake to not only grow generally, but grow in the right directions that are going to add more leverage and more value over time. Zach had a question, Zachary, in the chat. So he asked if the presentation will be available to pass on. Absolutely. And Zachary, you can go to snowflakeforgrowth.com, or you can email solutions@flywheelsoftware.com. That'll pop right into my inbox, or we'll be able to track you down based on your comment after the meeting too. I also want to encourage anyone who just wants to drop interest in the chat, they can do that as well. Lots of ways to reach out to us, but we'll make sure that anyone who wants the presentation will have access to it after the call here. All right. Any last questions? Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. David, Luke, thank you for your time today. Any closing words or final thoughts for the group here before we sign off?
Sure. I was just going to add, it's actually a really exciting time to be doing this kind of work for everybody that's involved in the growth and the engagement with clients and financial services. Previously, a lot of this would have been locked away, frankly, and you would have needed a large data team, an analytics team, and things to be able to do some of this stuff. And so I think it's really exciting to actually see, we worked with a relatively small regional bank in the Southeast. To see them unlock this, and even sort of very small fintech startups is equally as some of the leading national bank that I referenced earlier, that whole spectrum, being able to sort of unlock the data-driven marketing, so to speak, that was previously only the remit of large technology companies that had very large analytics and data science teams.
Yeah, I'll say from the Snowflake side, we're very excited about these use cases. It's for marketers especially, Snowflake can be super powerful, not for all the technical reasons we discussed, but again, going back to that data collaboration, right? Secure data sharing and data clean rooms. Snowflake is really the primary platform these days that is doing data clean rooms in a very efficient, easy manner. And it's a lot of great use cases for enriching your data, right? Or even going out to the marketplace, like I mentioned earlier, and getting that data. And then finally, like I said, there's so many more apps that are coming to the data directly, right? Instead of having to ship your data out to apps. And Snowflake is the only platform out there that is leaning in to that, and to work with a great ecosystem partners like Flywheel to support those ideas.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Even just seeing how the new paradigm is, the software comes to the data and the single source of truth. I think that's really exciting to see. And I think it kind of links to your question, Kevin, that I think I see posted in the chat as well, which is that one of the big things we're unlocking here is being able to just connect and go, be able to authorize the right IAM role for access, and then you're able to actually visualize your data within the Flywheel platform. So that's a fantastic, just how easy it is to get started kind of approach. And I think it's enabled by exactly what you're talking about, Luke.
Yeah, I think to bring that back home to kind of where we started today, a lot of the tools that are out there will ask you to kind of meet them in the way that they see the data and the way that other use cases and other industries have seen the data. The differentiator here when you put Flywheel and Snowflake together are, we see your customers how you see your customers, and your data is represented in the language that your marketers are speaking already. And that makes the onboarding time so much faster, and the time to value so much shorter. So again, we want to thank everybody. I see a lot of good comments and interests being dropped in the chat. Thank you all for your engagement, and we'll be reaching out to you all individually, and feel free to sign up at snowflakeforgrowth.com, as I mentioned. Thanks, Luke. Thanks, David. And thanks to everyone who joined.
Thanks, Anthony.
All right. See you guys.